Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I heard something.
All right. Ethan, you're muted, Ethan.
I saw it was being recorded. I'm like, I'm out of here. I hit the wrong button.
Yeah.
So we're waiting on some people though, right? Do we have Chriso yet? Oh, there he is. Hi, Chriso.
Yep.
Was Mark going to join us?
Yeah, as far as I know.
All right, I'll just keep an eye out for him. And Lucia.
And Lucia as well, right?
Chriso, have you seen it? I won't say it. I'll just reach out to you later.
Yeah, he saw it.
Are we whispering? All I know is that I voted today.
There you go.
You did? Yeah.
Did
you get a sticker or is that?
No, you don't get the sticker if you vote early.
Yeah.
But I make a point of voting as soon as I can, and then it's done.
I always say vote early and often.
Yep. As many times as they let you.
All right. Ethan, it is 5:02. You want to get rolling? And we'll do non-agenda items later while you're away. And we'll just waiver from the agenda brief for a little bit. Ethan has to leave for a teacher workshop or whatever conference. So we'll do, we're going to do the state mandated affordable housing stuff when Ethan's gone. And we'll do the minutes when Ethan's gone, when Chriso assumes chairmanship.
Thanks, Ethan.
all the fun stuff. Okay. So, do we have, I'm still looking to see, do we have an agenda for this one?
We do. Yeah. I can show it. I can share my screen if you'd like.
I'm sure I can find it. It's just, it must have been a while ago. Who sent it out? Was it you or Jeannie?
I don't know what's going on with my screen share right now. I'm stopping this. Show all windows. There we go. It would have been, hold on. Here it is. Right there. We amended it by adding another approval of minutes is all we did, Ethan.
Okay, and we're gonna do those when I'm here or when I'm not here?
I think it'd be more productive to do them when you're not here in terms of the short-term rental piece, because I think that's the critical part of this discussion of the meeting today. So
we're just gonna jump right into short-term rentals is what you're suggesting?
I am.
Okay. Jeremy and I hashed this out beforehand, and I obviously didn't absorb all of it. All right, so as far as the short-term rental piece, you know, I think we had a pretty good start last time around, and I know that Pat, you weren't here, but you were able to watch it. Did you want to jump in and add anything right off the bat, Pat, as far as your take on what you saw?
I sent out that email this morning that has the notes that we started to review at the last meeting before it got tabled. And I didn't know if you guys wanted to pick up back at that point or not. Because it does have some basic categories like the types of rentals that exist.
Right.
Because I think we would need to look at those and figure out parameters for those. And it has other notes that I made over time from different documents that we had gotten over time. But yeah,
Perhaps, since we're trying to finalize some of this, one of the first things we could do is all agree on the goals.
Right.
Because I've seen a number of people's memos or comments from other municipalities that that's an important foundation to build your work off of. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's absolutely right, John. That's where I was hoping to go. Because we're not going to workshop and write an ordinance, sitting on Zoom. That's not a constructive waste or use of our time, but to find out where we actually want to go with it, I think is really important. And I guess that's, the starting point. From Pat's notes, we have the categories, the 4 that are listed, and I'm not sure if we want to add to these, if there are any that we can think of, but we have from her notes, number 1 is non-primary, year-round home, unhosted. And then you have a seasonal home, unhosted. Then you have a primary home, hosted, and a primary home, unhosted.
right.
I think the hosted in general, I think is going to be pretty okay with most of the board, right? If you're on the property and you're renting out a portion of your house, that's Airbnb at its original purest form. Go ahead, Jeremy.
So you're talking about not renting out a dwelling unit. You're talking about renting in somebody's bedroom or a portion of their house.
That's the primary home hosted, right? I think that's what that means. Now,
Okay.
we get into and you're right to bring this up because that was my next step. Was where are we on ADUs? I know that I think our code says we can't do those.
Well, I mean, this is part of the, and Pat touched on it in her email, I think, which is important. We do have the unhosted short-term rental ordinance, which is police ordinance, which requires, obviously you got to register it, but it requires, you only have to register those that are not somebody's primary residence, right? So
right.
if you want to, I mean, we need to think of this holistically, and if that ordinance needs to go away or change, I mean, likely it would change because that's the business licensing piece. So we would tweak that based on what you're looking at from a zoning perspective, if that makes sense. I don't think we should limit ourselves to say we can't do something because our existing ordinance on short-term rentals.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Well, no, I just was curious. I thought we had something about, I thought I heard somebody say that we weren't able, that something in our ADU ordinance did not permit short-term rentals. Is that a fact or is that just imagined?
No, that's true. Now that goes to the accessory dwelling unit definition in our zoning ordinance, which that says that accessory dwelling units can, have to be somebody's primary residence.
Right. Okay. And then but taken from that, if it's their primary residence, they could potentially do short-term rentals when they're not there.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think that was the intent of the board, the select board, because of the need to give people the opportunity to leave for the summer, maybe make some extra income to pay taxes, upkeep on houses, all that, the whole thing.
Yep. No, that makes sense. Yeah. So
can I just ask a clarification question? So accessory dwelling units, how can that be somebody's primary home? I'm thinking of an accessory dwelling unit being an apartment over a garage,
And that's what they are often.
and that's what they're. So
Yeah.
that portion is not somebody's home. The house portion is somebody's primary
But
home.
Well, we don't define homes,
Yep.
right? We don't
I'll let
define
Jeremy
homes.
do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't define homes, we define dwelling units.
Okay.
And that's for, you know, a family, and we define family. So that in theory, I can have a single family home with an apartment over my garage. I live in the single family dwelling unit. Someone else lives in the accessory dwelling unit to that home, but that accessory unit is somebody's primary residence.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's based
I mean,
on who the resident is.
the intent was to try to give people opportunity to add another unit in their house, but make it so that it is not a short-term rental.
Right.
That it's helping with the accessibility of housing.
Yeah.
Access to housing.
There are some conflicts here too, I will say, when we did when we changed the density requirements last year. Someone can add now, right? In the village, you don't have to add more square footage to get a second unit in your home. And we never said that unit couldn't be a short-term rental, or, you know, that we never addressed the primary residency of that other unit. We just said you're allowed to have a 2-family home in the village now. You see what I mean? And we never did that on the other side. So I will say, on a permitting and review side in our office, it is getting a little challenging to kind of make all these things work together. I think it was just an oversight while we were loosening density requirements. It was just an oversight that we missed.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
That sort of got away from me. I had recommended that we talk about goals, and somehow we jumped into accessory dwelling units. So what I was referring to, and I'll use Pat's memo just because I think it's a good start. She had a list of goals just below her first section, but it was free up more homes for year-round rentals by locals, safety and insurance. There was a neighborhood compatibility component and a discussion of select board concerns, but you know, those are the goals that I was referring to, and I think those are pretty solid. I'd add on a section about, and I know there might be some state impediments to this, Jeremy, but I'd still seek to achieve some kind of regulatory fairness with some of the other inns and hospitality industry folks, so that there was kind of a fairness across platforms in terms of registration and taxation. And I know that we might run into obstacles, but I think that's a worthy goal.
Thank you. Yeah. I was gonna suggest something like that as well, sort of leveling the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, and John, I apologize. I really did kind of blow right past what you had suggested. When you said goals, I thought I jumped right to sort of identifying the types of structures. So I apologize for that. And I appreciate you bringing that back up.
All good.
Anybody else want to say anything on the goals? We hear Lucia and John suggesting that we add, and I actually had mentioned that, I recall in the past, that that having something that, you know, it you can't regulate one and not, these are businesses, in my opinion. We shouldn't be regulating one and not the other. Go ahead, Pat.
So right now, things like inns or B&Bs, they're not required to register. Is that it?
No, they are.
It's the other way around.
Meaning you want to take the short-term rentals and make it required for them to register.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about some of the things that are required of inns and bed and breakfast.
applying
like
that.
safety codes, safety
Okay.
codes and registering and, like, for instance, I think Airbnb now, people are paying taxes to the state of Maine. Right out of the top, it comes out of the top of your thing. But for a while there, they weren't even regulated to paying taxes. And it was on the owner's own initiative. So so I think that's a good one. Is there anything else that people would think of as goals? I mean, I would like for the number one, I guess I would change I do agree with it. I think year-round rentals by local, yeah. I guess that makes that makes good sense. I wanted to, sort of, I guess it's just, for me, it's more of a general term of access to housing for people who live and work in Camden. Which is essentially there. And that is for me the main goal. But I agree with the others that we've been talking about. And anybody else on the goals aspect? Go ahead, Lucia.
Yeah, I have one more. I mean, and maybe this is just a feel-good thing, but it comes back to community and preserving community and a sense of community. Because, if you have a lot of short-term rentals, you're losing that, or the more properties that get put into short-term rentals, you're losing that sense of community in the neighborhood. I don't know if we want to capture that as a goal, but that's one of the things that I hear quite a bit.
Okay, would you say that falls under number 3? Do you just want to add in community to number 3, or?
Sure, I think it can be incorporated in there, but I think just the sense of community is should be one of our goals.
Okay. Jeremy, your hand's up.
Yeah, this is perfect because this is what the purpose of the ordinance would be, right? When we draft these ordinances, you come up with a purpose. The purpose, and I think Shenley and I can work on those goals into a purpose, and then getting to the potential types and of STRs, we would handle those in the definition section. So kind of defining these, I think, is probably the next good step if you're done with the goals.
No, I want to make sure we get the goals aspect covered. John, go ahead.
I agree with the concept that Jeremy and Shenley can do the wordsmithing. But it's in the same discussion of goals. It might not hurt to somewhere in that goals section to include some acknowledgement of the benefits of short-term rentals to the local economy, to get more people up to visiting the shops and so forth. So, as we move forward, we've got a lot of discussions of imposing new requirements on short-term rentals, and I think that's appropriate. But as we're doing that, and this goes out for a larger discussion in the community, kind of up front, might not hurt to have some acknowledgement that there's some benefit to short-term rentals in the community.
That seems like a good idea to kind of help placate some of the residents that are renting out short-term rentals.
Yeah,
I think it's that the balance between that and when they're run as a business for profit. I mean, not for profit, but everybody's doing this to make money. But I hear you on that. Yeah, it certainly isn't. There's certainly not. There are benefits to it. I use short-term rentals when I go travel because I have a dog, or I like to be able to cook in the kitchen, things like that. And so there certainly are people who look for those sorts of places. Anyone else on goals?
I have one point to add on to what John was saying. I think maybe number 3 might be a good place to capture some of what his points were. We're not just ensuring neighborhoods are not overly impacted, but in some ways we're asking that we're looking to enhance them, because you're bringing this diversity of visitors into the town. you hope it's a positive impact, both on the businesses and so forth, and it would be, I think we can put a little positive language into these goals too as well, I think, instead of just making it punitive.
Yeah.
It's just a thought.
Okay. So am I correct here that Shenley, you're taking notes on this, and that you're the one that's gonna, you and Jeremy will work on the sort of capturing what we're saying and putting it
Yes.
into. Thank you. Okay, that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Chriso?
Yeah, I sort of along similar lines, but I wanted to say that we should have some mention of the historic, I've used the phrase before, the historic nature of vacation rentals within our community. Particularly from people, and this is sort of what John and Mark were just saying, but that, recognizing the historic nature of vacation rentals within our community and protecting that is a part of it.
Yeah,
'Cause
that gets to be a little bit tricky, I guess.
I know, but I think if we say, I think that where we're going to have the hardest time selling this is to the lot of people in town who do. And I mean, I did, as I said, I did vote today, and we have a complicated ballot proposal with a dual option on there. And even for us who've been talking about it for 2 years, the unhosted, owner occupied, like these distinguishing terms are going to be confusing. So if we're putting language in that says, we want to protect the traditional rights, but limit the business, I think that will help explain the goals. And
no, I agree.
And not put off the people who are, saying, so does this mean that when I'm out at my camp and on McGonagall, I can't rent my house for 2 weeks in town? Like,
right. And so I guess what I was confusing there, Krista, was there also are traditional businesses that pretty much run vacation rentals.
right.
And that becomes a little bit stickier. I agree with you 100% on the individual owners, but we're going to run into some tricky footwork when it comes to businesses that just have run these vacation rental businesses.
Well, except that what's traditionally been the case is that those businesses have managed a rental for someone who lives here. I know lots of people who used what is now what was bought out by Vacasa, because they didn't want to deal with, even with when Airbnb came along, they didn't want to deal with Airbnb. They didn't want to make the beds. And for 3 weeks in the summer, they rented their house and had those companies do it.
Yeah. And I think that would still be, if that's their primary residence, we're not talking about really impacting that.
Exactly.
Right. So, but I guess I don't know enough about the local businesses that they run, if there are houses which they manage that are not owner occupied at any point, not a primary residence. And I'm guessing they probably do. And I think that's where, we're going to get a little bit of pushback if we're taking those out of that market. So I don't know for sure where we're going with all that, because we haven't decided as a board what we want, what we're doing. But that I think we've got the goals. Then is that everybody satisfied with what we've discussed so far on the goals portion? And then we can sort of circle back to where I was prematurely on the different types. Does anybody want to? I'm going to kind of work backwards and ask if anybody wants to make a case on the board or have a discussion around the non-primary year-round unhosted, and a case to allow them to continue. There are options. We discussed different options over prior. I think we were grabbing some random amount of days. We can pick any number. I think one of the numbers we had was 42 days, which is 6 weeks right? If that they could be allowed to rent the house short term for 6 weeks, doesn't totally kill the potential to rent short term, but it does put an equation of, is it better just to rent it long term year round than to have it for 6 weeks available in the summer and make that quick cash? Other possibilities that were discussed were looking at a percentage of housing stock. It's a more complicated formula to try to determine how many of these are in existence, and then how many do we want to allow. Certain places have done, I don't remember what the numbers are. Pat might have it up closer to hand, but like 2% or 10%, or I don't remember what the numbers were. That's another possibility. I will state for my purposes, from my personal position, I'm more in line with the first two options I suggested, which is either just not permit them at all, or give them a certain number of days a year that they can use the rental market, the short-term rental market. But I'm interested in other people's thoughts and whether anybody wants to make a case to allow them just to go forward.
I'm just thinking, I personally, my feeling is non-primary, unhosted, short-term rentals, I would like to see them banned. I think a lot of people would agree with that. I think that if that's a part of the whole package, it's going to be a hard sell. So given that, I think that putting the limits is the easiest way to say. I think if we say, we try and get into percentages and numbers, like, Portland has 2%, that's a lot more housing. If we get into trying to do numbers, then it's going to be, it challenges the numbers of how many houses. Is challenging to enforce and track down, whereas all of this is challenging to enforce and track down. There's a whole piece of it that we just have to add that staffing level and the fee for it. But I guess my feeling is, like, we do allow a few of them, but we limit it by date.
By number of days?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying, Chris, you want to allow a certain amount of non-primary year-round unhosted properties. Yeah, you want to allow a certain amount, but put a day limit on it, a rental period limit on it?
Yeah, I would put the limit of how many days those can be rented, rather than trying to limit the number of houses. As I said, I would prefer to see them just not allowed at all, but I think that's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in. What I don't want to do, I saw something that interesting, and I didn't know it even existed, but Bangor has a vacant houses tax.
I did that.
You did that, Jeremy? That's your baby? Okay, great. Well, I thought that was pretty interesting. What I don't want to do is create an ordinance that encourages people to just rent for 42 days and then the house is vacant. Yeah. And so, I'm a little more of the mind, and I hear you, Chris, so that there is some question about taking them completely out, banning them completely. But I think if we think about that for a second, how many of the voters are actually owning a house that they're renting full time in short-term rentals? I think that there's more of a handful of people and corporations that are doing that sort of thing, and that most people don't have the luxury or privilege of having a house that they rent out to the entire year. So I guess I just want to discuss or consider that if they can't do 6 weeks, then they're either going to sell or they're going to rent it long term.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not going to let it sit. I mean, they could let it sit vacant, and then that's another question, is whether we want to ever consider the vacant houses ordinance that Bangor has. Jeremy could explain that more. We'll get into that another time. But we don't like having these dark houses already that we have. So I want to just consider that we don't encourage more of that. Is anybody of the? Oh, go ahead, John.
I support the idea of banning non-primary year-round home unhosteds. I agree that that might be a bit too intrusive or a bit too much. So the idea of a number of days per year works for me as a compromise. I am a little ignorant as to how many of those are out there in the wild. And I also don't have a real good way of distinguishing between a vacant year-round home and vacant seasonal home. You know, it's a practical matter. I don't know what the difference is. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, and Jeremy has the sort of the insight to the groups that can sort of scrape the data from the web, from the various rental hosting agencies. It's definitely not perfect, but they have businesses that's their job, John, is to say, here's how many short-term rentals we can find in Camden. I'm of the opinion that requiring people to certify under penalty of perjury and then having a fairly stern punishment or penalty for violating is really the best we can do. I mean, we're not gonna have 6 new employees to go around and track down and count days on people's rentals. But if there's a significant penalty and people are forced to certify to the town they are renting for only X number of days and that's it, and not one day more, I think that most people will adhere to that and know that they're taking a real chance if they don't follow their own stated rule, instead of having just sort of a rule out there that they're supposed to follow. But if they're forced to certify, I think that changes it a little bit. Go ahead, Pat.
Oh gosh, I just forgot what I was going to say. But back to the whole thing about the non-primary year-round home unhosted. I'm comfortable with seeing if we could ban the whole thing, because I think one of the recommendations, like Kennebunkport said, and there was another town I thought had given us feedback on this, is to get a good idea of what your short-term rental market is out there before you try to make zoning ordinances around the whole topic. And you could be right about the actual number of non-primary year-round homes that are unhosted. Maybe there's not a whole lot of those. And if the people are not living in Camden too, are they going to actually be out voting on the topic or not? So I would, in order to get as much possibly as we can back into the market, why not try to go for something like banning it?
Yeah,
and also, though, I think it's important to try to find out what is out there. So I don't know if that's something we could do before we start this process, if we can come up with hiring somebody to do that.
Jeremy?
I am constantly getting requests from 2 different firms that to give you guys a summary of what when they scrub Camden. Challenge, and they can do that. I can schedule that with you all. The challenge is, it will be hard to determine which ones are, not their primary residence, because that would have to happen after we actually engage someone to do this work, because they'd have to get access to all of our assessing databases, right? And where the ownership is. So that, I think, would be difficult, but we can definitely get some good numbers on the numbers of them and whether they're accessory apartment type units or are they bedrooms, are they full houses, and they could scrub by like windows in a year. So we could tell them, we can ask if it's open year round for a rental. We know that. So
Yeah.
I can work on that, and I'll schedule something with one of those firms, if not both of them. I think that would be helpful for you.
Yeah, that would be great.
It would only take about 45 minutes, half hour max with them. I've sat in on that. I'll work on that. That will help. That will help.
That would be helpful. And excuse me, I don't know if we'll be able to get it before our meeting with the select board, but I'm starting to go along with the group here, the group think, and that is, if we're going before the select board to a workshop with them, why not say, the feeling of this board is that we should be banning these unhosted non-primaries and see what their feedback is. There's room for negotiation. We've all said that we would be willing to move off of that, but that's what this board thinks is best. Is that right for everybody?
Yeah.
I just got a quick question. I would agree with that. I just have a quick question. I know we have some neighbors that do sort of, they're not really short-term rentals, but there's a lot of the woodworking schools, et cetera, where they do 6-month leases. So what constitutes a short-term rental versus a lease, or a long-term rental versus,
Mm-hmm.
if it's not an annual lease, but if it's a shorter term, because I don't think I would have an issue with 6 months, but where does that fall in? Do we limit people from acquiring housing for 6 months? You know what I mean?
What I've seen is the easiest distinction is that it's a monthly lease or rental versus a short-term rental. So if someone's here for a period,
30 days.
That resonates with me, the 30 days.
like it's a monthly lease, and if you're here for 6 months, then you're here for 6 months, and that's a different kettle of fish.
Right. So maybe this distinction is the terminology, a lease versus a rental. And a lease has a certain amount of length of time versus rental being short-term, less than 30 days or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good question, and I don't know if we have. I don't know that I'm trying to think if we've covered that before, Pat, in any of our discussions. Just looking through your notes, Jeremy may have some input here, but just that one caution again is if we start talking about these 30-day periods. For starters, there are some short-term rentals that are 30 days in length and longer. If somebody's renting, go ahead.
I didn't mean a 30-day rental. I meant a monthly, if the rental is based on number of months.
Like a month-to-month lease for a term of 6 months.
Because even have somebody living in a house for a year and a half, and because of the terms of their lease, they're on a month-to-month rental.
Right.
So that's to me is the distinction, is that it's a month-to-month. It's not a number of days, it's a number of months.
Right. So that's a different thing, I think, than what maybe was being understood.
Yeah.
And I think it's important because we've seen with, like, for instance, our current requirements say that you can't rent for less than 7 days. Some people may not know that. However, that happens all the time. People rent for a weekend, but essentially they don't rent again in that 7-day period. And that same thing could happen with the 30-day limit. If we were to put that on there, they might rent for 3 weeks every 30 days and then change it over to another one. So I don't think 30 days is going to be a good limiter on short-term rentals. But I take Christo's point that we're talking not 30 days so much as month to month. And I think that we have to do a little digging on that to think about what we would want. I agree with Lucia that Maine Media or the wood shop, the woodworking program, providing some sort of accessible housing, affordable housing to those people I think it's good for the town. I think it's good for the area. And there is, but it may be that there are hosted or not, or other options available to those folks. Once we take, these may not be their only option, is what I guess I'm getting to. So I haven't heard anybody really jumping in and raising an argument for allowing unfettered, unhosted, non-primary rentals. Nobody really on this board is suggesting that.
No, I'm not saying, not opposing it. I'm just going back to the point about, you mentioned Maine Media and Woodworking Shop, and are those folks coming in like as students for a long term, or I'm wondering about seasonal workers. It's always a shortage of housing for seasonal workers, and that's the lifeblood of Camden's economy in many ways. What about the folks that come in for 4 months or so, if they double or triple bunk in a unhosted rental? Is that, how do we make sure that that's do we, first off, do we think that's okay, and how do we make sure that that's maintained so that the seasonal workers have places to stay?
Yeah. I have to admit, I recognize that Camden is an extremely seasonal town, by and large, obviously, but I was not aware that there were a lot of people who moved to town specifically for the seasonal work.
Yeah.
But I'm not,
I don't know. I'm asking. Is just
I think there are a certain percentage. I mean, a lot of the restaurant workers that come here, from what I've heard over the years. So, yeah, there is.
some of the restaurants are putting their folks, in apartments above their restaurants, for example.
And the inns do too. I mean, because we do get a lot of seasonal workers that are here for 4 months, whether they're from overseas or whatever. If we can't house them in the inns, they do live somewhere, and sometimes they're with the host family, or sometimes they bunk together in a rental.
Chriso?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that, and I'm just, this is just going to be anecdotal and whatnot. I don't think that we're looking at, rental properties in Camden are not going to be the houses that are summer seasonal workers. Let's be honest. There's a difference between someone who's coming, and I think the example of the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship, those are often people who are coming to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more likely, and I know because I've known some of them, and what they're looking for is an accessory apartment that they can have for 6 months. To go back to what, somebody who's working at the waterfront for a summer or Sea Dog isn't going to be renting a Camden house. Let's just.
So I can give you an example. There is someone who owns 2 properties in town, and one is not a pristine vacation rental that somebody from New York is going to come and rent for a month. But students who do work at the inns live in that house during the summer. So that is a short-term rental. It's right here in town, but it is that type of home. It's not a desirable vacation rental.
And is that a minimum of like a 3-month rental?
Yeah, it's about 4 months.
Yeah.
Because we start talking about 3 months might be a little bit more tenable.
Short-term rental may be anything less than 90 days.
Yeah. I'm a little more comfortable with that than the 30-day for sure.
So
that's an interesting thing.
What do they do with the house when the workers aren't there?
I don't think anybody rents it while their workers aren't there, because it's just not that type of a vacation rental. It's
if it's the one I'm thinking of, I don't think it would be a particularly good year-round property, for example.
Yeah. But I also know of someone who used to come and watch our dog, and the person who has her house, or where she was leasing, has just sold that house for an Airbnb. So you know, that person's being ousted, and now it's no longer a, you know, yearly rental. It's going to be a short-term rental.
I think I know your dog walker, Lucia.
No,
All right. Well, I'm at the point where I'm gonna basically skip out here to head off to this this parent teacher conference. So we're gonna put a pin on this one, and you're gonna get taken on a wonderful tour of Shenley's overlay district, and you'll also have a great discussion, I'm sure, on approving minutes. You have my approval, and I'll be back as soon as I can be. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ethan. Appreciate it. Chriso.
Yeah,
I think you're vice chair, right?
yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Do I, John?
Are we done talking about short-term rentals?
No, we're just pausing that to
Okay,
take care of some household business while Ethan has to step out.
so how long is he stepping out for and how long is this meeting?
We've got this Ethan does not let these types of meetings go beyond 7, is what traditionally has been the case. We were going to try to do the minutes from March 1st and May 4th. And then Shenley was going to give a brief, I'll do a brief thing on the affordable housing law, and Shenley will give a brief summary of the overlay work that she's just drafted. It's very draft preliminary, just showing where we're going, and it covers everything that's in the state law. And then we would maybe talk about moratoriums if Ethan gets back, and get back to the short-term rental when he gets back.
All right, well, I'll just quickly slip in a comment because I don't see all that happening in the next hour and 15 minutes. As I've tried to digest what people have had to have said and looked at a couple other municipalities' approach to short-term rentals, I believe that registration and the registration form and the things that people certify in that registration form and the ability to use that as an enforcement tool is pretty important as we go forward. So I hope we can discuss that once Ethan is back.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
For sure.
No, I think, you know, and we'll talk about it more, but I think a big part of it is that what we initiated as a town as a registration form process for rentals, we know it just hasn't worked because no one's using it, because there's no teeth to it and there's no sort of enforcement measure.
Yeah.
And I know 2 of the people who have actually done the paperwork, and they're, you know, but yeah, it has, like, that's how it has to work. Did everyone have a chance to look at the minutes?
Somewhat.
Yes.
Are there any comments on either set of minutes?
I'll just also remind people that we always forever have the recorded videos.
Right.
So we've got the minutes, and if anything ever really comes up, we've got the video.
Do I have a motion to
What
accept?
are the dates again?
March 1st and May 4th.
It says March 29th. Oh. Do I
Hold on.
have the minutes? Oh, maybe these
Hold
are
on.
minutes from something else.
I don't think I printed them in my packet. So let me go there. Hold
I'm
on.
gonna go to the packet, yeah.
Hold
Oh,
on.
this is,
Let me share the screen.
the minutes you sent out are from May 4th.
Okay, there's also March 1st. Yes.
There's 2 sets.
There's 2 sets.
Mhm.
March 1st and May 4th.
Oh, okay.
And so the first one, March 1st, right? We talked about We did the minutes prior, but that was a public hearing on chapter 290, which was the pier, docks, floats stuff. That's what that was. March 1st was. And then we also did the retail cannabis stuff on that day.
There's a lot of minutes on that one.
Yeah. And then May 4th was a workshop on the housing stuff that we had the last time.
Yeah.
I will move that we approve the minutes of both March 1st and May 4th.
Second, any second?
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Supposed to do a roll call vote on these since you're on Zoom.
Well, I was just gonna see if there was anyone opposed, but we'll do it if you can. Roll call vote. Lucia,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Pat,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
and that's an aye from me. The minutes, thank you, are approved.
Perfect.
Jeremy, what do we got from the state?
So briefly on this, we talked about it last time. Hold on, sorry. I talked about there's a couple of bills that were out there to tweak this LD 2003, and because the rules just came out, it sounds like they're not going to approve any of them except one of them, and they've taken. This has to do with extending the deadline for adoption. It sounds like they've rolled one into another bill that will give municipalities that are under town meeting form of government a 1-year extension to comply, and towns that are under town council or city council will get 6 months. And it looks like they're trying to provide maybe some funding for municipalities to cover the costs of doing a state mandated requirement like this. So it sounds like that's the bill that's going to pass. And that's where we are. Again, there's right, 3 components to LD 2003. I forget what the state law is called now. There's the affordable housing piece, which we have to do. And we have to do all 3 of these: the density piece and accessory dwelling units. The density piece we're in compliance with already with the density piece because of what the changes we made a year or so ago. So we're going to let that lie. Shenley's accessory dwelling units is, I think, a definition tweaks, to be honest with you. And we're working on that. Don't have anything really drafted in draft form yet, but we've got stuff on it. And then the affordable housing piece we discussed last time. This allows for increased density. You can't require more parking. The whole host of things that you're now required to provide or have in your zoning ordinance to allow affordable housing. And there's also requirement for long-term affordability in there. And so Shenley, what we talked about was doing, rather than tweaking the ordinance to allow affordable housing in all certain zones and creating new standards in each of these, the tables that we have already, we would just do an overlay zone section, similar to what we have for the BOZ, which is the business opportunity zone. So Shenley's put together, based on the rules, some tweaks that, and they're draft, and we know that it does need some more work, but this is in essence a draft of the affordable housing piece, and Shenley will kind of go in, do a little summary on that. Shenley, if you want me to share the screen while you're doing it.
Or
so
I
that-
can, yeah, I think I got it
can.
here, yeah. I guess, let me see if I can find it. Do you see it? No.
Yep.
Yes.
Let me pick
Not
something
anymore.
else. Well, actually, we're just going to focus on, I don't know if you have it in front of you, the draft or not. What we can do is.
Shenley, does it help if I can find it quickly?
I think it's in the packet. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
if you want me to share it, because I'm not sure everyone has it, and I don't know
Okay.
how people's screens are, if it's helpful to be seeing it on a screen or not.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Is it
Go
helpful?
for it. Can you see it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it can be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
just so that we're all looking at the same document, I think it's helpful.
Exactly. Or it's in the packet. There you go. Thank you.
All right, let me just get to it.
After that,
There.
there it is. Yeah, I mean, we can call it whatever we want, but we did, I guess you all discussed a while ago about using the approach of an overlay district. Overlay zoning, which is basically just a, a regulatory tool that overlays the existing, base zoning that's already there. So this is kind of like a special zoning district placed over our existing residential zoning in our zoning ordinance. But tonight we were just going to focus on quickly on that one section 2, which is the Department of Economic and Community Development's Chapter 5. It's just that one specific that applies to affordable housing density. And basically we just kind of picked the minimum out and made sure we were in compliance with everything that the state is making us do. And we just like Jeremy said, we just tailored this after your business opportunity zoning overlay district. We went through and we put definitions in. They're somewhat tweaked a little bit from the state. It's not word for word at this point, but we just wanted to get your feedback on if you have anything to add. But anyways, we have the definitions.
And these definitions come from the state, right? I mean,
yeah, they come from the state, and it's good to have some of this in here because there's no, when you throw out terms like we don't know what does this mean, rental or ownership. It's and the state went through in rulemaking, they went back and they did a lot of definitions. So for a while we didn't even have any idea what some of these terms meant or what the state meant. But we do now that they did some of these definitions. So the chart and like I said, this table 1, it doesn't have to even really stay there, but it was kind of like a process. So these affordable housing developments, they are allowed in certain circumstances in certain areas. And one of which is they're allowed in if we've established a growth district, which we have for the town of Camden, it's VE, it's Village Extension. So that zoning district, whether it has public sewer, public water or not, you're allowed to have affordable housing and increase your density up to 2.5 times the base density that's allowed. But you still, all these, when I'm talking about all these overlay requirements, we still have to meet these minimum lot size that the state establishes. We need to meet shoreland and all this other stuff. So that still applies to this. This is just another way, I guess the state thinks they're going to approach affordable housing by creating more opportunities to have more, obviously more residential units. So as you know, Village Extension, we're allowed to have it. And then the other area that it has to allow multifamily development. So any of our zoning districts that allow multifamily development is, that's when we're going to be able to have affordable housing projects development in that area as well. And right now, currently in our code, most of our areas that allow multifamily development also require that we're hooked up to public water, public sewer. So that's the only place where there may not be any public sewer is going to be in your VE district, in your growth district. So that's going to allow affordable housing, but you'd have to meet the minimum lot requirements for septic system. And but anyways, as you go on, it must be allowed in public multifamily housing. You have to have public water and sewer unless you're in the VE district. And I guess if you looked at Chapter 5, which whatever, but you have to meet these other caveats. Like Jeremy said, you can't increase the parking requirement. You have to allow, you cannot require any more than 2 parking spaces for off-street parking. No more than 2 parking spaces per 3 dwelling units. So it's their effort of trying to make it more affordable, not to put the cost on to the consumer by making more requirements. And like I said, the base density is allowed up to 2.5, 2.5 times the density. You can round down. So that's where we got the 2 dwelling units per square footage in the middle part of the chart. And then, of course, a couple of our zoning districts are exempt from parking requirements, so they wouldn't have to meet any of that. But I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. The rest of it is just like you were brought up at the last meeting about trying to maintain who's going to be able to accommodate this requirement that it's long-term affordability. And it's a 30-year commitment. But these things that are other items that are in front of you now, they're kind of just lifted from the new rule and put in there, maybe modified just a little bit, but it's just to put all that in front of you all just so you can see what is being required of us at this time. But there's different requirements for rental housing, for ownership. It has to be affordable. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Like I said, all the other requirements like shoreline zoning and subdivisions and the other zoning ordinances, the other zoning requirements for each district will still apply, other than that 2.5 times the density. So award.
I wanted to touch base on what John mentioned. Thank you, Shenley. That's perfect. And John, you mentioned the last time about maintaining that long-term affordability. And I think the way that we'll handle that, these projects do need planning board approval. So I think what we'll do is make one of the approval criteria that they're required to submit annual certifications to the municipality along with a fee. I don't think there's going to be many of these multifamily affordable housing projects happening in Camden, to be honest with you. I can think of maybe a couple, you know. So I think that's probably the best way to handle it. And I think that would tie it to that planning board approval is what we were thinking. And we would have a fee schedule. It would be included in the fee schedule that the select board approves annually to make sure we're actually paying for it. They're paying for the cost of monitoring and maintaining that affordability.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Does that make sense, John?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, there's our.
There's a very primitive map right there.
But yeah, that's
You
all.
see where that is.
Yeah.
Is
Those are all the
my
zones.
is my understanding correct that the attached or the accessory dwelling unit allowance is something that goes beyond the highlighted area on this map, and somebody in a RU2 zone property could have an accessory dwelling unit?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, they already can, John.
Okay. Thank you.
Already, and then the ADU rules, we're going to make sure ours are consistent with theirs. That's how we'll handle that. But yeah, those are allowed anywhere. Dwelling units pretty much allowed, and we don't require additional lot size for an accessory dwelling unit unless it's required under the state septic rules.
If somebody is on town sewer and they're proposing an ADU, pardon my ignorance, do they pay any kind of an impact fee, or is there a hookup fee that they pay for sewer?
I don't believe there's an additional hookup fee.
Okay.
Sewer and water is based, I mean, I think it, and I don't live in Camden, so I don't pay for sewer and water in Camden, but how it works in Belfast, you're basing it on your water usage, right? So
there's no impact fee that is
right,
assessed at the time of building permit. Okay.
right.
Thank you.
That's not right.
What's that, Jeannie?
Here, I unmuted you. Here
Oh.
she-
Okay, it depends on the lot layout, if it's can be divided in the future. Dave Bolstridge has always said it has to have a separate connection. and that would incur a fee.
For
Is that-
accessory,
Right, so if the accessory dwelling unit is on a portion of the lot that could be legally divided and you have two separate owners, then that line has to be taken all the way up to the street.
Okay,
two
thank
separate
you.
owners, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but if it's like the classic garage apartment unit, it doesn't have to have that.
If it's close to the house even or attached or in the garage, then it's considered a continuous foundation
Right.
thing, then it can hook
Same
up
one.
to the house.
Okay. Good.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Yep.
So at
That's-
this,
That's where we are.
there's no, thank you guys for all that work, but there's no definite action that we are looking at right now.
Not right now. I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I
Yeah.
didn't want to go. I didn't want to go further than what the state law is. I wanted to stay right with the state law on it. I didn't want to just, it's a lot of work to tweak it even more. I don't think we're going to get a lot. And many of these affordable housing projects in Camden, I mean, as much as I'd like them, and I think we need them, you know, I don't, so I think from what we need to do, I think we can keep this language for the most part like this. Bill, Kelly and I and Shenley are going to review it again together. Bill will review it finally after we do it, and make sure we're just right with state law on it. And then we'll do a public hearing on it, probably a public hearing on it sooner than later. If we can get the accessory dwelling unit piece done, we don't have to do the density piece. So if we can tweak, I'd probably like to do it as one package at the same time, one hearing on both of them. And I would say probably early July on that is my guess. Yeah, that's my guess. Nordhaven is going to be the next meeting, the final subdivision for that. And then we can probably get a draft out for the final meeting in June. And then have a public hearing on it first meeting in July. And it'd be weird if the municipality, the town doesn't vote for it. Like, what happens then, right? It's a state mandated thing and people don't want it. We'll see what happens, but it's something we've got to do. So July 1st is what I'm thinking about for a public hearing on that. Or July, first meeting in July.
And that will be an interesting test of local power for somebody, I'm sure.
For sure. And then the plan is to and just have that ready for November, and just be done.
Yeah.
Done with that.
Our meeting in July, the first, is it the Wednesday, first Wednesday in July that we meet?
No, for me,
It's the
Thursday.
6th,
Thursday.
right?
Yeah, the 6th.
So the 6th, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
that's where we are with that. I think we're good. Chriselle, what time is it? 6:08. Do you want to touch base on the moratorium stuff, which is on the agenda?
If we want to move to there, because I do think that I think we should be talking about it.
I did talk to
and-
Ethan about it a little bit, about process, because we've already had this
Yeah.
discussion. Right? I mean, we've talked
Right.
about it. We had a public hearing on it. We approved and sent those to the select board, and the select board didn't do anything with them. So
Yeah, and so I mean, that's the thing. It's like, what is? Because they didn't say no either.
right,
They just never dealt with it, right?
punted.
I mean, because they didn't have time at the meeting it was on the agenda for, and they've just never gone back to it, which means it's just kind of out there. And so like that was my question. I mean, I think that we have two issues. Is one, there's the existing stuff that we had a hearing on and approved about dock height and land attached piers, but then there was our discussion that we would like to do more.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you talking about banning any more piers in general? Crystal?
Can I
Go ahead.
jump in? Can I just
Yeah.
jump in? I did talk to Ethan about just process on this, just to try to be as efficient as possible, because, yeah, I don't want to circle around the same thing we've already done and reviewed. It seems to me, based on what you guys talked about prior and the discussion and what you sent to the select board, that, and maybe we can, should I show it? Share my screen. I'm gonna share my screen. The issue that, moratorium. All right. The issues that the Harbor Committee, I mean, I think everyone remembers, right? On what they discussed, their issues, and they divided them into like 4 different categories, right? Density, which is the number of piers. I do think they, wasn't like they didn't contemplate banning piers. I think they just felt that the ordinance has already limited them a fair amount in the outer harbor. So
Yeah.
there was, I think, maybe 4, if I remember correctly, that could be shown again.
It's a total of 4. Yeah.
Total of 4 residential piers would be allowed in the outer harbor under the current ordinance requirements that we have. I did tell Ethan I was going to dig out, and I didn't look yet, but how many do we have in the outer harbor currently? I didn't do that yet for him. I think there might be a plan here that shows it. But then they looked at habitat. It seemed to me that the planning board, along with the select board, felt that the Army Corps and the DEP's reviews and their experts and their laws that regulate this stuff on the federal and state level, which includes Department of Marine Resources, the Historic Preservation Commission, and Native tribes, they felt that those were addressed and really wasn't an issue.
I just have a quick question, Jeremy.
Yeah.
How did Native American tribes, does that come into play if any of the land is on Indian preserves or something?
So how this works is, with all of these permits, these federal and state permits, notifications and notice of intent to file, and applications are required to go to certain agencies. And in this case, they're required to go to Native American tribes too. So they get a notice of the permit application. If they have some sort of documentation that there are some, significant site or burial grounds or whatever at a certain location, they review them. And if they have issues, they comment and they provide comments. Much like the State Historic Preservation Commission does. With every one of these permits, Department of Marine Resources as well, and again, Army Corps and DEP, and the Harbor Committee. They did look at, reviewed the. I'm just looking at what they said here. Reviewed the last 2 pier applications. They did include reviews of soil erosion, wetlands, and water body protection rules. Under NRPA, they're looking at wildlife. You can't unreasonably harm significant wildlife habitat or wetland travel, aquatic habitat, etc. So the board felt that was an issue, or the committee didn't feel like that was an issue. I don't think you guys felt that was a concern at the time when you reviewed it the last time. Public access, it didn't seem like that was an issue either. I know people talk about whether or not you're able to access when you're on a kayak, or whether you're fishing or fouling, whether or not you can get to the inner, down to low water. So they didn't want to address that much at all. And then sea level rise, etc. They wanted to raise the height from 6 feet to 8 feet. And they wanted to make a requirement to ensure that when it's constructed and designed in such a way that it can be lifted as time goes on, as sea level rises, without having to construct a whole new structure. So those were the recommendations. I don't think any of you had issues with any of them other than the question of density. And so I was in my conversation with Ethan, it seemed to me that density was the issue that the board had. And I think banning them means 0 more, which to me means the density issue, that you feel like it's dense enough with piers. So I think that's where, from my perspective, where the board, if you want to jump into the pier thing any more than the harbor committee did, that's where you jump into it.
Yeah.
And then the thought was that you could take this, have a couple of meeting discussion on it, or one or whatever, and then have some sort of executive summary or something on this issue to share with the select board in June. You know, because I think it's important to really recognize and acknowledge the time and effort the harbor committee did.
Yeah.
But you are a different board, and you guys look at things differently. You kind of have a bigger, broader picture and of the community, and that's your kind of your review. So I think jumping into it is appropriate, and I think having a recommendation to the select board in June is a good idea.
I think, yeah, that's exact. I mean, to me, where we ended up was that we really appreciated the work that the harbor committee had done, and fully supported the ordinance changes that they proposed. We just felt like there was more conversation to be had on other matters. So we don't want to go back and look at those things, because we agree the height, and I think, you know, it's just a shame that action wasn't taken, because, and the land-based pier component as well, because those are things that need to be addressed. But I also think, you know, we heard a lot of public comment and our own conversations about future piers and should there be any more piers. And I think that where in the outer harbor, there's only 4, but I think the coastal harbor piece is what really has triggered a lot of people's attention as well.
So here's, just so everyone can see the screen, when Chriso refers to the outer harbor, and this is not a great view, sorry I didn't scan in color, but this is where the inner harbor ends, right? At the yacht club is the last property on the inner harbor. The Kastner Pier, which had damage during that storm and the select board allowed to rebuild last night, actually, that's the first property in the outer harbor. This is the outer harbor here. All this. There is a prohibition currently in place, no more piers over in the Sherman Cove area. That under the law, under our current ordinances already. But then the coastal harbor is all of this, right? It goes all the way up to Lincolnville and all the way down to Rockport is the outer harbor, is the coastal harbor. Very different environment and very different usage than the outer harbor.
And I think that's where, because I think, you know, we were talking about, okay, you could only have 4 more piers in the outer harbor, but the number of piers that's potential in coastal harbor is significant, and they're a much different, they function with the environment in a very different way. They have to be longer and bigger. And as any boater knows, it's not a great place to have a pier. So, or the potential for damage to piers is much greater out there. And I know that when several months ago, when we first looked at the harbor committee's recommendations, and Ethan threw out a straw poll of whether we wanted to get into banning piers, and we all kind of dodged the question. I feel like having had these conversations, I think some of the mood has changed. So the question is, do we want to have conversations about any other modifications to harbor ordinances around piers?
I've got a quick question. Jeremy, I don't know who oversees this. I would imagine that you get it off, it comes through your desk as well, but how many piers are actually, or permits for piers are applied for in the coastal harbor area?
I don't have the number off the top of my head, and I don't know how many there are currently, but I'll get those numbers to you. There are not many, and I pulled this up to see if in their report, there is one that went through the Harbor Committee approval, went through the Planning Board approval out on outer Bayview, that's in the coastal harbor, and the select board didn't hear that one before the town vote,
For the moratorium.
before the moratorium vote, even though it was approved by the planning board. The Harbor Committee said okay to it and met all the standards. So based on what the Harbor Committee said, currently there are no piers on the northern side, north of Northeast Point, and 3 piers on the southern coastal harbor. So you've got three. You got 3 in that whole stretch.
Right. So my question really stems
3
to,
down here.
is this something that's in high demand, and do you see a lot of requests for them? And it seems like they jump through quite a few hoops anyway to get approval.
They do. No, since I've been in Camden, again, there's only 3 in that southern coastal harbor. There's none north. I did talk to someone who was interested in building one on the northern side, closer to Lincolnville. But that's it. So, I mean, there's, we've had one since I've been there, in the outer or in the coastal. I don't, what they said here. What did they say here? That's in density, right? Yes.
Yeah.
They didn't really talk outer coastal harbor much.
What's that?
Well, you've got it there.
It's rugged or deep, and the pier is impractical on much of the coastal harbor. Topography of the area provides a de facto limit on the number of piers that could be constructed, is what the Harbor Committee said. And there is a existing 300-foot separation requirement between piers. They did not go look at how many could be constructed.
Yeah, I did a quick scan looking at the top, and particularly in the northern stretch heading up towards Lincolnville, there's potential for quite a few because those lot sizes are fairly decent. You could almost have one per lot in some stretch. Yeah. And I know that right now there isn't demand, but we are seeing up and down the coast more people building or buying properties. And even though it's not practical and it's rugged, they're building piers and they end up being really big. There's one that I know Lincolnville has had their moratorium because somebody wanted a pier that was going to be 400 feet long. And that's the thing, when you're in that section of harbor, because they have to be more rugged, they're more, they're bigger.
Yeah.
And they do impact, having, as I've said before, having to go around a kayak in the harbor, in inner harbor or outer harbor, it is a harbor, so it has docks and piers, but those two stretches of shoreline, which there were no docks 20 years ago outside of Camden Harbor in either direction. And I think the other question is, do we want to preserve what the shoreline looks like, that when you come out around Sherman Point and go up to Lincolnville, it's a pristine looking shoreline? And I think that's another question that we should consider.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Other thoughts?
Chris, so I'll make a comment here. I appreciate your thinking. I agree that a pier in the coastal area is probably a dumb idea. I'm not afraid that there's a backlog of applications for them if we adopt the recommendation of the Harbor Committee and hold cloth in that regard and don't call them out for additional moratoriums or restrictions. I don't feel strongly that way, so I'd be happy to have that discussion as a board, but I hope we don't spend a lot of time to attach an amended comment for the town board to consider. And just finally, if we're having a discussion in this regard, maybe for Jeremy, for your response at some point, is, I was taken aback a little bit that the Conservation Commission would have a representative show up at the meeting and say that they weren't consulted. And so I'll be interested to hear if there was some sort of a closure on that by the time this got through the board.
Yeah, I can actually have probably Josh Moore comment on that for you guys. I know they were invited and asked multiple times. So, hi, Ethan.
He's back.
We're all
I'm
done,
back.
Ethan. Thanks.
Oh, good. All right. That's great. I'm
No.
ready for dinner anyway.
No.
You solved all the problems?
Yeah.
Chris,
Great.
you want to go ahead?
Yeah, well, we're talking about piers. And just quickly, that we don't want to redo what the committee did, but we feel like there was still a bit of conversation to be had, particularly around the question of whether or not we want to discuss banning piers, anything like that, that the Harbor Committee, that their amendments left out of the discussion.
Mhm.
And we know how much you love piers.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, it's the it's under the density section. They talked about what's out there and I think that there might be available a room for 4 more or whatever. And I'm all set with the density and what we have already.
Well, and where we were, just as a sidebar to that, where we were also talking more right now was coastal harbor, which they didn't really kind of cover, but I think that's where a lot of people are even more worked up or open to saying, yeah, we don't need piers in the outer harbor, in the coastal harbor.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'm on both personally, but I'm open to whatever the board is up to on that. I think it made it pretty clear how I feel about the piers. So, but I'm certainly open to hearing what everybody else feels. I think, as you indicated, the important thing is to leave intact, all the work that the Harbor Committee did and acknowledge it, because there's nothing in there that I disagree with. They just didn't approach it from the perspective of, should we consider outright banning it? Or maybe it came up, but I don't think it was really on their sort of their charge from the select board. I would be in favor of doing that, but as written, I don't really have any concerns with the work that they did. I actually support what they did.
Well, and I think the thing that is also important to remember about, and I didn't say this earlier, but with their amendments on the height piece, most of the private piers in the harbor are built in the way that's described that can be adjusted, and most of them would, so that height increase would enable someone with an existing pier to go higher.
Right, and that would be important to preserve regardless.
Yeah. So whether we say there's no new, so it's important, exactly, yeah, so it's important to keep, because regardless of whether there's new piers allowed or not, that change is important for existing piers.
So, yeah, so here's something, this came up as I'm dealing with the Kastner Pier, because they're doing some repair, maintenance, emergency building, new for the most part. I think it's important, if we do go out to ban them in the outer harbor, we need to make sure, I think that, and coastal, if that is a recommendation that the planning board would have to the select board, while keeping everything else, and just let the select board see where they want to go with it. I think it's important to make sure we have a provision that allows existing piers to be maintained and to be allowed to go up. Got to tweak the ordinance in that fashion too, and we didn't do that. So we'll have to do that. If you guys want to ban them, we would have to tweak it so that
existing piers can be, that the height of piers can be.
Right. As part of maintenance or repair or reconstructing existing piers.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair.
So are you looking for us to give feedback on whether we want to ban the piers in the coastal and outer harbors?
Well, I think it's up to you. I'm not trying to drive this train at all. I think it's the planning board's, it's your purview. I think you have a bigger view, kind of more holistic view of the town and the issues and the resources than the harbor committee's focus, right? So I think I'd leave it to you guys. And I think if that's what the board wants to do or would like to do, then we would draft something. Shenley and I can work on it. I can work on it and get Ethan to sign it on behalf of the planning board. That would, when you have that meeting in June, say this is where we are with the piers. We appreciate the harbor committee work, but we think we really ought to look at limiting any more, and then hear what they have to say. Doesn't mean then you guys can't move forward with doing it, right, Ethan?
Right.
That's within your purview.
I think given the some of the conversations we had earlier about other opportunities for boat owners and where they may dock their boats, etc., I think I would be for banning any more piers in the coastal and outer harbors. As I think there's other opportunities for people to have their boats and get to their boats with the current setup in the Camden Harbor.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think it's pretty jammed up and people are on waiting lists for things. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite as easy, it's not easy to get a spot on the dinghy dock. It's not easy, there's a waiting list to be a member of Camden Yacht Club, but there are options. My feeling, I kind of want to pull them out because the outer harbor, I kind of go both ways. But I think that the coastal harbor is something that, as I said earlier, both for sort of protecting that shoreline, is where I'm really very open to a ban to prohibiting new piers in the coastal harbor. Because
it is pretty amazing. I mean, that's a long stretch that has not one pier.
It's a huge stretch, and if you actually with Lincolnville, it actually continues because Lincolnville doesn't have any either. And the issue that I also have with them is anyone and I do think that there are going to be people who are going to buy a property there and want to put a pier in, and it's going to be an enormous structure that serves very little function because it's not a good part of the coast to try and have it, you're not going to really want to keep your boat on a mooring out there. It's very rough. It's very exposed. And
It's basically just a pickup spot. Like if
Yeah,
you want to sail up to your house and pick up your people on a boat.
3 or 4 times a summer.
Right. That's my point. That's sort of my main point with most of these piers is how little they're used, but that's especially true out there.
And I think that, if you look at the feedback that we heard from folks from the Conservation Commission and elsewhere, I mean, that just and that's why I sort of feel differently about, piers in a harbor. A harbor has piers. Like, we're pretty close to maxed out, 2 or 3 more. I'm not opposed to banning 4 more. I know, but in reality, would they actually? That also includes the town building one at Lake Beach. So,
I feel like I misunderstood that prior conversation then about the availability of slips either through the yacht club or just in the harbor in general.
well, I mean, it's true of any harbor
Mhm.
that, whether it's Rockland, Rockport, Belfast, they have some dinghy tie-offs. You have, some people keep their dinghies on a float at the launch ramp. Some people don't have a dinghy; they just use the launch service, either from Wayfarer or if they're members of the yacht club. I think and there are wait lists for all of it, but there are wait lists
Right.
for
Everywhere.
and there are wait lists for moorings and float space in the harbor too. So it's
Right.
It's just
Yeah, and I think it's important to make sure we're talking about the same thing, Pat. We're as Crystal was explaining, there's all sorts of different ways people get to their boat, and there's also all sorts of places that people can keep their boats. That doesn't mean that none of them. That doesn't mean that they're all available to everybody at all times. But the question comes out is, I don't think people are using these piers to tie their boats off onto and keep them there.
Right.
They're basically just a way to sail your boat up to the pier and have your people walk down from the house and get on the boat. If that's all you need to do is get on your boat, absolutely, there's a launch service at Wayfarer Marina that can do that for you. And that's not a wait list. You might have to wait 20 minutes for them, but you literally walk down to their office and say, I want to get on a boat, and then they take you out to your boat.
well, and the other piece to keep, and this photo highlights it. You see how many boats are on moorings in Camden Harbor. There aren't that many properties that front Camden Harbor. So there are lots of people
Yeah.
who, by far the vast majority of people who have a boat on a mooring in Camden Harbor do not own waterfront property in Camden Harbor.
Mhm.
Right. So there is availability to get to your boat if that's the concern.
Yeah.
And as far as getting a mooring, that's a difficult task in any harbor. Around up the coast of Maine. Try getting one in Yarmouth. As far as so really, and again, that's sort of my question is how much are these piers actually used for the purpose? And Chris had mentioned 3 or 4 times a summer. I haven't heard any evidence that anybody's, not that it's, we have any actual evidence or whatever, but these are actually used more than that. And that's where I get into the balance of, more density, even in the outer harbor. I'm totally in agreement on the coastal harbor. But I still don't see any reason why we need to even continue to allow them in the inner harbor or the coastal harbor. I'm sorry, the outer harbor either. So that's where I stand, but I'm willing to go along with the general, feeling of the board.
I'm getting seasick just watching the aerial photograph.
Feels like you're on a boat.
Yeah.
So I have to say, I see a significant difference between what's called the coastal harbor, which really isn't a harbor at all. It's the coastline, right?
Right.
And the outer harbor, which is a harbor, because when you look at how many boats are in it, I guess I agree with the harbor committee's decision on that, and I don't see a problem with if there are 4 more that come in. I don't see a problem with that, but I completely agree with the moratorium on the coastal shoreline, which I just don't see why it's a harbor at all.
Yeah. All right, Shenley, can you stop your share just so everyone can kind of see each other better? Because I think there, perfect. Thank you. Do you want me to draft something? I think I know where Pat is, Chriso, Lucia.
Let's, do we know where people are? I don't know.
Oh, I think so.
Okay, well, I wasn't here for the whole discussion, so.
I think we're all pretty much solidly opposed to piers in the coastal non-harbor, and if you want to.
Chris,
Non-harbor.
I'm not solidly opposed to them as a regulatory approach. I think they're a dumb idea, but I'm kind of weak.
The problem is, John, there are people with a lot of money who
I hear you. I hear you.
Yes, so.
Yeah.
All right.
But we're a little mixed on the outer harbor, I think is, I guess, where
Mark, what do you think?
I'm not in favor of piers in the, what are we calling the coastline now? The
coastal harbor.
Yeah.
coastal harbor, yes, I think that is, and get to John's point, maybe a dumb idea, but I think we can take action against to prevent dumb ideas by restricting them from becoming reality. Are we talking about a moratorium on existing piers in the outer harbor or banning them outright?
Well, there is a moratorium right now. That's where we stand. But the harbor committee was charged with evaluating and then looking at piers from a variety of perspectives. And what they didn't discuss a lot or come around to, which is, either way, is whether or not to allow more. There are 4 potential piers in what we call the outer harbor, where there already exists, I think, about 10. And so the question is one of density for me. I would still really like to go with none, and that's how I'm going to vote. But if we go as a board, it's 5-1. That's fine by me. I'm okay being on the other end of it. But I'd like to guess. I think it's important to at least decide as a board where we are on that. We'll go with the majority when we recommend to the select board. So how about we just take an informal roll call if you're in favor of prohibiting any new piers in the outer harbor. Sorry. No new piers in the outer harbor where they already have piers. As Lucia said, it already is a harbor. So I will put my hand up for that one. So we've got 3. We're going to be a split vote, it looks like. Crystal, you don't have your hand up, right? Because there's one off screen there.
I mean, I'm not opposed to banning them in the outer harbor.
So you're going to abstain from both?
I mean,
Are you saying banning or just stopping the further construction, future construction?
Oh, right. Yeah. No, we're not going to take down any existing piers.
No. This is just saying we don't want
no new piers.
No more piers in the outer harbor. I'm okay with that.
So that's a 4-2.
Okay.
So that's a 4-2. So Jeremy, that's going to come with a sort of a soft recommendation, I guess. That's where we are. But
in the coastal harbor, none.
Yeah, none in the coastal. I think we've got a unanimous on that one. And
Maybe. John, is that unanimous?
I'm kind of like Chriso was on the outer harbor.
Yeah,
he
so
broke pretty easy the last time.
Yeah.
If somebody could just go over to John's house and twist his arm, we'll be all set. We'll be unanimous. No,
I don't know if it's not important that things be unanimous, is it?
No, it isn't. It's not, but it's a reflection of where we are, and I think that's part of what this is about. We're going to the select board. They're gonna, have their own opinions, and they may say we don't care whether you're 4-2 or 6-0. This is what we would like to do. So, that's also the prerogative. So,
well, for history, I think it's 5-6 years ago, the Harbor Committee and the Planning Board said to the Select Board, we think that we should ban any more piers in the harbor, and the Select Board said, that's nice, move on. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to have a history lesson.
5-1 on the coastal harbor.
Yeah, why don't, yeah, sure.
Sounds good.
And just with that caveat, if you're, that, as we said earlier, that if we are banning new piers, we do want to amend the existing ordinances to allow existing piers to be raised.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
And we still want to define land attached floats.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's the biggest issue, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so all of the work of the Harbor Committee is still recognized and appreciated and endorsed, except to the point where they didn't go as far as in the density. Yeah.
We want to take one step further.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Jeremy, you were evasive in your discussion of is the Conservation Commission and the Harbor Committee, are they at odds with each other on this, or are they okay with each other? An opinion.
I don't think that they sat down at the table together, even though they were invited to, and had the conversation together. I think what you got was the Conservation Committee talking about it separately on their own, and didn't share those thoughts with the Harbor Committee, but came to the Planning Board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense?
Well, it's unfortunate, but it makes sense.
Yeah. So I think they'd go along with your proposals of 4-2 and 5-1. So, right.
Yeah.
All right, Ethan.
Chris has disappeared, so apparently he's no longer in charge.
You came back.
Getting back to short-term rentals, because I think that's important. That's our big, I think our big slug. Just so you know, what we're going to do is first meeting in July is the plan to do a hearing on the affordable housing overlay zone.
Okay.
Getting back to short-term rentals. And I know it's 10 to 7, but I know there's a lot here. I don't know where you want to go with this now. We'll continue the conversation, obviously. I think Shenley and I can send some information around to you based on our thoughts and understanding of where you guys are with these things, based on the notes, and just trying to keep the conversation going and information flowing to you guys. You guys can't share information back and forth, but you can share it with us, and we would just kind of compile it and then bring it back to you.
Yeah.
I think
If I can,
we've got a purpose down, right? And I think defining the types of STRs is important. And then we can figure out how to regulate them.
I think
that's really great. Go ahead, Chriso.
Well, I think that, the real key one to focus on is the non-primary unhosted, because those are the ones that we really want to. I feel like we're all in agreement. We want to limit or get rid of those because impact on real housing. And I think that I would suggest that we sort of focus on those right now, and then the monitoring, enforcement, fees and fines, and how we're going to make it functional.
You mean registration of short-term rentals, is that what you're saying, Chriso?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
We can ban them all day long, but if no one's going out and checking to see how many days they're rented, or if there's not a process for that, it doesn't do any good.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, you're going to get us the summary information on what's out there.
Well, we're gonna have a presentation with a summary. Is that right, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'm gonna call them tomorrow. Yep.
Okay. All
They'll
right,
probably bang right out to do that because that's basically they're hunting for work.
That's their sales pitch, yes.
Yeah,
They send their
it's their
best and brightest.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's great. I think that'll be really helpful to know. And yeah, so I agree, Chris, though, that the non-primary unhosted is the key element here. I do think that registration and potential inspection of the others is important down the line, to the extent that we can afford it. Not afford it. I'm talking about staff hours, etc. But if so, I think that's something that.
That's where the fees come in.
Right.
Right.
That's where you bring it back into the whole pot and go from there. So I think that's, rather than drag out the discussion now, just point out that I'm sure you're aware, Jeremy and Shenley, but below we have some of those discussions actually have some sort of a definition and some don't. So we need to be flushed out, but you won't have to do all of it. I think the one where I think we'll have the most discussion is probably around the seasonal stuff. I think we've all indicated some recognition of traditional seasonal rentals or seasonal camps around town, and not wanting to step on those toes too much.
All right.
And so that means we can get something sort of almost, I wouldn't say we'll have an ordinance drafted, but we'll have our goals and our definitions and our plan for how to regulate at least the hierarchy of that before the select board meeting on the 28th.
Yeah. So my plan would be to have, we have June 1st is Nordhaven. My plan would be to have that June 15th.
Okay.
You mean our
Fantastic.
next meeting for short-term rentals will be June 15th, Jeremy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But there will be hopefully some information flowing, as Jeremy indicated. So again, just to make sure everybody's clear on that, Jeremy and Shenley can send us something. We don't want to then just have a reply to all where we just start discussing aspects of it, because that becomes a public meeting.
Mhm.
That's the issue there. So if you have some sort of suggestion, you can send it directly to Shenley and Jeremy for discussion at the next meeting. Is that the best way to do it, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I see you, Lucia.
Yeah.
We'll be prepared to answer those questions, have information available for each person's questions.
Great.
Okay, I just want to bring something up before we finalize this meeting, but and I know we're focusing mostly on unhosted, but I just do want to make sure that we keep talking about the primary home hosted, simply because there are quite a few of us who run businesses, lodging businesses, who are significantly impacted by the home hosted. The short-term rental hosted. And so, I mean, I would be for exactly what has happened in other towns where that also is registered, or at least somewhat controlled.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
that was exactly what I said. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
I'm sorry, I
yeah.
misunderstood, because I heard you talk about unhosted, so yeah.
The
short-term
unhosted,
rentals would be-
unprimary is going to be limited to, you can't rent less than 3 months.
But all
Right.
short
Unhosted,
rentals would be regulated.
Registered, inspected, something of that nature. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I think that brings in the safety element and also the leveling the
Yes.
playing field,
Yeah.
all of those things, and also bringing the fee in for enforcement, right? So
Right.
everybody's kicking into the pot for that. And
That's
so,
right.
Yeah. So
Yep.
I think that's the general consensus of the board on that one too. So thanks, Lucia.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Anything else then, or are people hungry for dinner?
Hungry
Yeah.
for dinner.
Yeah, that's me too. Okay, well, I think this has been very productive, and I'm glad that we were able to kind of iron that out, both on the piers and the short-term rentals. I'll be sure to take Shenley's magical mystery tour of overlay zones after the meeting and review that. And I appreciate everybody's time and energy and effort.
So in person on June 1st for Nordhaven.
Yep.
In person.
And we do have the final package for you guys to pick up in the office if you want the actual paper copies, and we can send you the link too.
How many reams of paper is each package?
It's not so bad.
They're already printed though, so it's not
Yeah.
really-
You have those copies now and available? Okay,
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
yeah.
all right.
Thanks.
So you don't go around like newspaper route and just fling them at our doors, Jeremy.
We can do that. I had years of experience of doing that with the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the Cleveland Press.
That's right. You're a Cleveland boy. I told you my dad was a Shaker Heights, and
Yeah.
I had friends from Cleveland Heights.
I'm well
Yeah.
familiar with those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
Thank you.
One question, if I'm awake enough and while I'm over in Europe on June 1st, am I permitted to attend, or?
Yeah,
Is it not?
we'll try to do a Zoom link for that too.
But it'll be the wee hours of the morning and for 7 hours ahead, so,
Yeah,
Funny.
that's the Nordhaven. If you want in, you can be in.
okay.
It will be mostly a lengthy procedural meeting, though. I mean, it's,
If
There
Chris
needs,
has-
there needs to be a better way of getting through the findings than to
I've
sit
got
there
one.
and listen to Ethan scroll through them one by one.
I saw one in a review that I just reviewed, an old subdivision, and I will share them with Chriso, the motion man.
Well, we should like maybe hire that guy that works for the
Auctioneer?
auctioneer to like run through it for him.
Oh, you want me to read? I can go faster. I try to
I
to
think-
balance it.
you just say,
My voice just gets to a frenzied pitch, but I try to just share my dulcet tones with y'all.
no,
Okay.
you just say as described below.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I'm allowed to abbreviate, I'd be happy to. It would certainly save me.
All right.
Find a way.
Okay,
Okay.
I agree with that, John. Thank you. All right, everybody.
All
All
right.
right.